This is California, the richest state in America, home to Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and 40 million people. If it were its own country, it would have one of the biggest economies on the entire planet. Bigger than France, bigger than the UK. This is one of the most powerful places on Earth. And it is named after a fake island, a place that never existed, ruled by a queen who fed men to her pet monsters. I want to be completely clear that I'm not exaggerating for views here. The most powerful state in America is named after a 500-year-old fantasy novel about man-eating griffins, mountains of gold, and an army of black warrior women who killed almost every man they met. And here's the best part, almost nobody who actually lives in California has any idea. So let's fix that. This is the story of how a made-up island became the richest state in America. To understand this, we have to go back to Spain, around the year 1510. A writer named García Rodríguez de Montalvo has just published a novel, and to understand what kind of novel it is, you have to understand what was popular at the time. This was the era of chivalric romances, big, ridiculous adventure stories about brave knights, magic, and monsters. Think of them as the Marvel movies of 16th century Spain, wildly popular, not exactly high literature, and absolutely stuffed with over-the-top nonsense. And Montalvo was cranking these out. His book was called Las Sergas de Esplandian, The Adventures of Esplandian, and it followed a heroic knight having various heroic adventures. Standard stuff. But at one point in the story, Montalvo needed an exotic, far-away, fantastical place, somewhere that sounded impossibly distant and magical. So he invented one, and he called it California. Now, in the book, California is not a beach. It is metal. Montalvo describes it as an island on the right-hand side of the Indies, very close to the terrestrial paradise. Basically right next to the Garden of Eden, and it has some features. First, it is inhabited entirely by women, specifically strong black warrior women living like Amazons, with no men allowed on the island at all. Second, the island is absolutely loaded with gold. In fact, gold is the only metal there, so much of it that they make all their weapons and even their armor out of solid gold. And third, my personal favorite, the women have pets, and their pets are griffins, mythical creatures that are half lion, half eagle, which they have tamed and raised from birth. And you might be thinking, oh, a fantasy island where warrior women keep majestic pet griffins, that's kind of nice. It is not nice, because Montalvo explains what the griffins eat. They eat men. The women trained their griffins specifically to attack, kill, and devour any man who was unlucky enough to wash up on the island, and it gets darker. According to the book, when the women needed to keep the population going, they'd keep a few men around, temporarily, for the obvious reason, and then kill them. And if any of them gave birth to a baby boy, they killed the baby too. Only the girls survived. So to recap, Montalvo's California is a golden island next to heaven, run by warrior women who ride man-eating griffins into battle and commit fairly aggressive population control. Ruling over all of this is their queen, a powerful, beautiful, fearless warrior named Queen Calafia. And honestly, if this is all starting to sound weirdly familiar, hold that thought, because we'll come back to it. So that's the fiction, a completely made-up island in a trashy adventure novel. Now here's where reality makes its catastrophic mistake. Montalvo's book was a bestseller. Everyone in Spain read it, including the men who were, at that exact moment, sailing off to conquer the New World, the conquistadors. These guys grew up on exactly these kinds of stories. Magical, faraway lands, unimaginable riches, gold for the taking. It was basically their entire motivation. So their heads were already full of Montalvo's Golden Island. Then, around 1533, a group of Spanish explorers, first a mutineer named Fortun Ximenez, and soon after, the famous conquistador Hernán Cortés himself, landed on a long strip of land on the western side of Mexico. And they made an honest mistake. They didn't realize it was a peninsula. They thought it was an island, a hot, dry, distant island out in the ocean. And somewhere in the back of their gold-obsessed, novel-addled brains, a bell went off. A mysterious island, out west. Could it be? Could this be Queen Calafia's Island of Gold? So they named it after the book. They called it California. That's it. That's the whole reason. They basically saw some land, remembered their favorite fantasy novel, and went, yeah, that's the one. Spoiler, there was no gold, no griffins, and no warrior queen. Just a peninsula they'd misidentified. But it didn't matter, because once the name went onto the maps, it stuck. And this is the truly wild part. The name spread. From that peninsula, now called Baja California, it crept north, onto the mainland, onto the coast. It survived Spanish rule. It survived Mexican rule. And in 1850, When the territory became a state of the United States of America, it kept the name. Nobody stopped to go, wait, why are we naming this after a book about man-eating griffins? They just kept it. And so today, 40 million people live, work, and pay taxes in a state named after a fictional island of gold-armored Amazons. Every time someone says California, they are, technically, quoting a forgotten Spanish fantasy novel from 1510. And forgotten is the right word, which brings us to the twist. That novel, Las Sergas de Esplandian, the book that named one of the most important places on Earth, it basically vanished. Almost nobody reads it today. In fact, its most famous appearance in modern literature is as a joke. In Don Quixote, the most celebrated novel in the Spanish language, there's a scene where they burn Don Quixote's ridiculous adventure books, the ones that rotted his brain and drove him mad. And Montalvo's book is literally one of the ones thrown on the fire. So the book that named California was quite literally considered brain-rotting trash by the greatest author in Spanish history. Now, time for some honesty, because I'm not going to oversell this. Historians say California most likely, or probably, comes from Montalvo's novel. It's the leading theory by a wide margin, accepted by basically everyone who studies this. But it's a theory, not a signed confession. A few alternate ideas have been floated over the years, some Latin phrase about hot ovens, that kind of thing. But historians have pretty much dismissed all of them as far weaker. There's also a fun detail. Nobody even connected the novel to the state's name until 1862, when an American named Edward Everett Hale dug it up and pointed it out. So for centuries, people said California without any clue where it came from, and even Montalvo himself probably borrowed the name, most likely from the Arabic word Khalifa, meaning leader or successor, a nod to Spain's centuries under Moorish rule. But here's the thought I can't shake. Remember how Queen Calafia sounded weirdly familiar? A beautiful, powerful warrior queen ruling an exotic kingdom, riding tamed mythical beasts into battle? Scholars have literally pointed out the resemblance. Queen Calafia and her griffins may have quietly paved the way for a certain other fictional queen with a taste for flying reptiles. Calafia was, in a very real sense, the original Khaleesi, 500 years before Game of Thrones. So the next time you see California on a map, or a license plate, or the back of your phone, remember what you're actually looking at. It's not just a place. It's the last surviving trace of a forgotten story about a golden island, a griffin-riding warrior queen, and a group of conquistadors so desperate to find paradise that they wrote fiction directly onto the map of the real world, and it never came off. The island was never real. But the name outlived everyone who knew the difference.